G'day. Thanks for tuning in to our most recent episode. Unfortunately, this is just a disclaimer. Unfortunately, this week we had some internet connection issues at our guest's end. So there's a couple of moments throughout the episode where the video freezes and the audio lags a little bit. You can still understand everything, and it still was a really interesting conversation. So I definitely still recommend it anyway, just be aware of that before going in. I haven't figured out exactly how, but I'm sure the Labor Party is to blame for this in some way or another. Anyway, unlike the Commonwealth Games, we're still going to go ahead with the episode, so I hope you enjoy it. All right. G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, the podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
I'm okay, Pietro. Just a little preface again, like last episode, my audio might not be great. This time it's not because I don't have headphones, it's because I've had the flu and my voice is on its way out or back in. I'm not really sure where it's at. Look, if we have any hate listeners out there, they might be saying you should have had a flu shot. Well, I didn't, and I'm alive, so...
You bloody anti-vaxxer. You dirty anti-vaxxer. Max the anti-vax. Anti-vax Max.
Anti-Max.
Yeah, some of our anti-Max listeners. Anyway, look, I'm sure like last time, your audio might not be great, but the quality of your comments, as always, I'm sure will be. We're really excited with our guest today. He is a returning guest. However, there is a significant difference since the last time we saw him, in that last time he had not yet managed to get himself elected. And since then he is now a member of the Legislative Council in New South Wales. So for those of you who have not yet worked out who I'm talking about, I'd like to welcome into the show a very warm welcome to Mr. John Ruddick once again. How are you, John?
Good, Petro. Thanks very much for having me, and nice to see you, Max. And your voice sounds fine, mate.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the elephant in the room first up. The maiden speech that you gave, what was it? Maybe a month ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the maiden speech in Parliament is something that I recommend to anyone who has not yet listened to it. Famously got banned from YouTube. I think is it the first maiden speech ever to get banned from YouTube? Is that right?
Yes. We certainly haven't heard of it ever happening before in Australian history, no.
So the first maiden speech in Australian history to get banned from YouTube. And I've just got a short list here. So in your maiden speech, you, one, blasted the whole COVID regime from lockdowns to vaccine mandates to the debt, to the bowing to Big Pharma, to the slander of ivermectin, to the curtailing of free speech. You, two, denigrated the notions of carbon zero, and you outed members of the Liberal Party for thinking that it's disastrous behind closed doors, but voting with it to appease polls. You, three, compared climate change to religious hysteria. And four, finished with an outline of anarcho-capitalism and how government is always immoral and harmful, and the world would be a better place if we phased it out and replaced it with voluntary action. So my first question is, what do you think could possibly have gotten your video banned from YouTube?
Okay, well, look, we certainly slammed as much as we could in there within the half hour that we were given. And a parliamentary colleague asked me about a week before if I finalised preparing my speech. And I said, look, I've been taking 20 years to prepare this, so it's all under control. I think what it was the ivermectin. That's what got it banned. On the first account that put it up, which was Dr. John Humphreys, our party's founder, YouTube account, humble little account, it's got about 200 followers. And now, we didn't even say that ivermectin works. I mean, what would I know? I'm a history student, but we did point out four uncontestable facts about ivermectin. We said, firstly, that it was 4 billion people had taken it before COVID. The inventors of it won the Nobel Prize as recently as 2015. We said that some researchers claimed that it was helpful with COVID, and that the government not only banned it, but they just derided it as horse dewormer.
Yeah.
Okay. and the government went along with this, and they didn't correct it. And so you had idiots like Peter Fitzsimons writing articles and tweets saying, "Oh, it's just a horse dewormer." No, 4 billion people take it. It's since been pointed out to me since the speech by someone who knows these details better than me. They said, "John, you missed out the key point about ivermectin." And he said, "Look, the reason they had to ban it was because the COVID vaccines were brought in under emergency authorization. And the law in the US says you can't bring in a vaccine under emergency authorization while there is a potential other remedy." And lots of credible people were saying, well, that other potential remedy is ivermectin. So they had to kill ivermectin, couldn't care less whether it worked or not. They had to kill ivermectin to defend their squillions of dollars in profit.
Yeah, I had heard that same thing, and the same thing happened with hydroxychloroquine before, because that one seemed to have some positive results before ivermectin kind of became part of the conversation, and they discredited that in a similar way immediately. You know, it was conspiratorial, it was doing more harm than good, and that sort of thing. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for making sure that this video also gets banned from YouTube for using the word ivermectin about 10 times within the first 3 minutes. I'm kidding. No, so do you think is ivermectin still a buzzword that is like just gets ticked somewhere and gets things banned, or do you reckon someone went through and saw that?
It's hard to know. Look, since it got banned, and then it's sort of, it's had a lot of traction around the world. We think over 1 million people have seen it by now. So some other YouTube accounts have put it up and they're not being banned. So I think that look, the picture I've got in my head is that some overzealous youngster in there at YouTube just saw ivermectin and banned it. Now, look, I'd like to thank that person because they helped promote the speech a lot. But look, I think they've moved on from ivermectin. And COVID and the vaccines. I don't think they care about it that much. So it was odd that they banned this. Now they want to ban other things, but I think they've sort of, no one's going to take any more of these stupid COVID vaccines. The Commonwealth government's up to their, 5th recommendation, and I don't see any long queues of people trying to get their 5th shot. The cookers have won.
I've also not heard of anybody who's got it and said, "Thank God I got the COVID vaccine." I've only heard of people getting it and saying, "Wow, I wish I didn't get that."
The cookers have won.
Well, look, well, just on that point about the cookers winning, okay, so we've had big business, popular culture, politicians, the bureaucrats, everyone out there with a bit of authority has just shoved it down everyone's throat. Just don't stop taking your COVID vaccines. And this little fringe minority, the cookers, the heretics of our day, who are slandered left, right, and centre, have said, look, we're not certain that these things are actually, more good than bad. And now 95% of people haven't taken the fifth shot. So and the government's still recommending the 5th shot. So who are the people listening to? They're listening to the cookers. Yes, we have won.
And that was the point I was going to make, is it's so interesting that the conversation is now, they're so keen to get the conversation past COVID, past vaccinations. You don't hear talk about the 5th vaccination, even if it's recommended somewhere. Like, there used to be signs everywhere, like plastered all over every pharmacy, every doctor's office, every medical place, even supermarkets and stuff, get your vax to keep you safe. And that's all very quickly and quietly gone out the window, and they don't want to talk about it anymore. And yet it's us who seem fixated with this idea of still wanting to talk about that sort of stuff. But it's perfectly rational, because if you weren't on the receiving end of that, sure, you didn't care about it then, you just took it, you want to move past it. But if you were on the receiving end of that, where you were called literally a heretic to like science and freedom and intelligence and anything reasonable and logic, if you're on the receiving end of that hatred, of course you're going to want to keep that. Like, you've seen the other side. You've seen the lies and the slander that they're willing to throw at just this one point. And that should be really worrying about what government will do when it decides something is not the allowable opinion.
Look, I look back on the war on terror, and I see that the way that we treated our Muslim communities in the West, and the libertarians at the time were very much in their corner. It wasn't until the Libyan war that I sort of really could see what was happening with this neoconservative movement. It wasn't about bringing peace and democracy to the world. It was about, there's a war machine that just needs wars to fight. They went and smashed up Libya for no reason. And it made me, and people like David Lionhelm and many others were saying at the time, all these surveillance laws, are really dangerous. And I used to think to myself, look, we've got this terrorist threat, but the Lionhelms and the libertarians were correct. That the war on terror has passed, but the surveillance laws are still in place, and in fact, they're only being strengthened. So we were told it was just going to be a temporary thing. Yeah. So now that I've been on, as someone who did resist, fortunately was able to resist the COVID vaccine, madness. I now look back and see the way we treated Muslims, and I feel ashamed how we did it.
Yeah, and another kind of insight of all of that is into the way the government sort of broaches these really large, broad, open-ended enemies is when you think about, like, they declared not a war on, a specific group or on a specific country or with a finite end. They declared a war on terror, like this abstract, which allows them to then, use the Patriot Act or the surveillance laws here for whatever. And with COVID, like, it was a war on this disease that you couldn't see and that was super infectious, and it could have been anywhere, and it kind of was everywhere, and it like this abstract, which when you broaden the scope of what they're trying to do so wide, like, there's no end to the powers that they can take into their hands to try and curb it, because it's it's everything, it's everywhere, and terror kind of does the same thing there.
Yeah, and look, it's we were all alarmed about it from the beginning, but the disappointing thing is the COVID era has passed, and you really think that libertarians around the world would have had this big surge in political support. Now we have had a increase in support, but I mean, look, I'm convinced the majority of Australians look back and think we overreacted during COVID. The sad part is that they sort of still seem to think, oh well, I'll vote Labor or Liberal.
Yeah.
Because these are the guys that inflicted it upon us. Now, surely they can see that the masters of our universe, these political figures who think they're sort of all wise figures, they've been exposed as morons. I just wish people would wake up more. Now, look, that's our job as activists to get them to wake up.
I think the biggest problem is that so many people are just too complicit. It's so much easier just to forget it happened and go on with your life. And like, so many people have so many other things to worry about that it's just, let's just forget it's happened. But the problem is, you forget it's happened, it's going to happen again.
Yeah, you're right. Look, all the positions of authority in society, the courts, the police, the academia, politicians, the bureaucrats, they all went along with it. But you're right, Max. It's not only the authorities. In our private communities, there were a lot of people who were enforcers, dobbers, and just in private conversations, people who didn't take the vaccine, who were skeptical of the hysteria, were badly treated by family and friends. And so a lot of people sort of are invested in it being continuing with the hysteria. I still put out a few tweets about COVID, and I'm just bamboozled by how many people out there still want to defend the record. It wasn't that long ago that the left used to, one of the left's biggest enemies that they used to criticize all the time was a little industry called Big Pharma. They used to go on about it all the time, how corrupt it is, how close to government it is, and how many squillions they make. Well, guess who defends Big Pharma now more than anybody? The silly left.
Yeah, it's bizarre how that's been turned on its head, and the left was also anti-war once upon a time. That's also been turned on its head.
Exactly.
When
this Ukraine. Sorry, go for
No, you say it. Perfect.
Well, look, like we've got this. We used to have these big anti-war protests. Down in our capital cities now, and looks like in retrospect we can say that those anti-war protesters was right. Well, now we've got a war that could absolutely, probably won't, but there's a reasonable chance it will turn into a nuclear war, certainly a pointless war, and this Ukraine situation. But it's definitely got the potential to go nuclear. I'd give it about a 5% chance. 5% too much. Well, why the hell aren't there, a million people out on the streets of, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, and Brisbane, and New York and London saying, look, let's have a peace conference. Let's settle this thing down.
Well, why do you think there aren't those protests? Because I agree with you. Like, it's horrific that we could play this game with this proxy war that the US is playing with Russia and Ukraine, and we're complicit because we send them. We're the biggest financial support donors to Ukraine outside of NATO, which is bizarre. And we're the furthest away from that conflict, I guess, geographically. I'm not sure exactly if we're further from the US, but why is that? Do you think that I understand why big government is complicit in supporting these wars, but why aren't there the protests on the street, do you think?
It's an extremely good question. Okay. And I don't claim to have the answer, but I think I'll give you my best theory at the moment. We're all sort of in the shadow of the United States, politically and culturally. We follow them. When America's talking about an issue, then Australia, Canada, Western Europe, they're all talking about it. The whole world follows America. Now, the Republican Party in America historically had been isolationist. And so, and they were reluctant to get involved in World War I, and they were reluctant to get involved in World War II. But they, so that and who started isolationism in America? Just a little president called George Washington. In his farewell address, he said, "Look, just don't get caught up in foreign entanglements." So the Republicans have basically had this tradition of being isolationist, and then the Democrats in the 50s and the first half of the 1960s had this movement in them called what we now know as neoconservatives. Now, I think they were called national liberals at the time. And they thought, look, America's the dominant power in the world, and we've got an obligation, a moral obligation, to go out there and fight for freedom and democracy. Okay, and these were intellectuals, the national liberals, and influential and high up in the party and the Democratic Party. Now, then the Vietnam War went to hell, and then the Democratic Party became an anti-war party, sort of from 1968 until quite recently. So what did those national liberals do? They walked into the Republican Party, and they became very influential in the Republican Party. Now, then during the period of Ronald Reagan, they were somewhat influential there because they were very anti-communist, and that's a good thing. But Reagan was really very much a realist with his foreign policy. He didn't start any wars. He sort of strangled the Soviet Union through economic strength. And yes, he built up the military to sort of, threaten them. Okay, and look, the fall of the Soviet Union was a great thing for the whole world. So Reagan did a fabulous job. Now, then by the 1990s, the neoconservatives are sort of, they've now gone from national liberals. They're now called neoconservatives because they were new conservatives, because they were new to the Republican Party. And then 9/11 comes along, and then the neos just wanted to go on this big mission. And you read George W. Bush's second inauguration speech. It's all about saying, like, we're Luke Skywalker. We're going to go out there and we're going to knock over all the baddies in the world. And then, of course, the Iraq War and Syria and Libya and everything went to hell, and Afghanistan. And then the neoconservatives became discredited. And then a fellow came along by the name of Donald Trump in the Republican Party, and he's running for the president in the primary. And he just said straight out to their face, he said, "Oh, you guys are all a joke. The neoconservatives have led us to hell. They've brought disgrace to the country. They haven't improved. They've only brought rivers of blood. They've cost us a lot of money, and they've hurt American prestige." And the neoconservatives, these are the people that hate Trump more than anybody else. It's those intellectual neoconservatives. Okay, and so they hate, and so all this never Trump movement, it was the neoconservatives. And then to their surprise, Trump wins. And so the left hates Trump's guts because Hillary was it was hers. It
was destiny.
That's right. And so they are super fired up against Trump, and so they just have this irrational frenzy of hating Trump. And then they teamed up with their old mates. The neoconservatives went back and they said, "Well, we hate Trump too." So they just became this ugly, this unholy alliance between the left, the Democrats, and their original friends from half a century ago, the neoconservatives. And they just warmly welcomed them in. So now the neocons are back in their original home, the Democrats. And so what do the neocons want more than anything else? A war with Russia. Why? Because it's the biggest one. That's what they want.
Yeah, and I mean that even speaks to the whole immediately using the Russian hoax to discredit Trump when he was first elected. So it hamstrung his first 2 years, which I mean goes hand in hand with the neocons within the left. I mean, look, I agree with all of that. But so why do you think that this group, this unholy alliance, has managed to simmer down people's wariness and fear of war in general, so that there aren't the huge protests? So just to revert it back to the original question, how is that?
The left wing sort of activists and their voters, the sort of ones who are fired up, they've only got one guiding principle, which is Trump bad. So whatever's anti-Trump, they will be on the side of. So if the people who hate Trump say, "Oh, let's go out there and let's have a proxy war with Russia," and then they just have to say, "Well, Trump wants peace with Putin." So then they say, "Oh, that's a terrible thing." Now, another thing why they sort of really hate Russia is that, we get misrepresented about what's happening in Russia. The truth is, Russia has been a very illiberal society for 1,000 years. Okay, it's very sad because Russia is part of Europe, but they had those brutal czars, for 1,000 years. Then they had the worst bastards of all time, the Soviet Union. So they've had very, very unfortunate run of leaders. Now, in the last 30 years, Russia has changed, and it has changed in a liberal democratic agenda. Now, I know it's not Switzerland or Sweden or New Zealand, okay? It's far from a perfect liberal democracy, but the trend line is improving significantly, and we should 6,000 nukes getting out of control. And so another reason why they really hate Putin is that Putin had the audacity to say that they're not going to teach rainbow stuff in the schools. And now it's totally legal to live in a same-sex marriage in Russia. No problem at all. Lots of people do it. Okay, but I mean, he just said, look, we're not going to teach it in school. Now, that's his decision, and some people may disagree with that. But there are elements in the left that think because he's done that, he is Satan. And so that's another reason why they particularly hate his guts.
Odd that they would have that position, considering that was virtually Obama's position when he first ran for presidency pre-2008. Like that is the position of the Democratic Party 20, 30 years ago. Biden himself was against.
Penny Wong was publicly against same-sex marriage. So was Kevin Rudd. So was Julie Gillard. The whole lot of them were. And, then it was actually, everyone's forgot this, it was actually Joe Biden who sort of pricked the balloon. He was the vice president. In about 2013, he's the vice president, and he's hoping to be the Democratic candidate in 2016. And he made a smart little move. He went on Meet the Press, which is their biggest political show, and he said, "I support same-sex marriage." And Obama was cranky with him for doing that. But the Democratic base was happy with Biden. And so then Obama, a couple of weeks later, had a change of tune. He says, "Oh, well, I support same-sex marriage now too." Okay, so it was actually Biden played an important role in it.
Well, there you go. Biden's, because I've seen, I'm sure you have as well, Biden, those videos in like the 80s and 90s where he's fervently against it.
Yeah.
So I mean, he played his role at least. But again, the point I suppose is, Obama, Biden, Hillary, all the rest of them, Gillard of 20 years ago are heroes of the left, while Putin's Russia is Satan of the modern day for having virtually the same views.
I think a lot of these examples are synonymous of what's wrong with the left, and that is that they can't really form their own opinions or viewpoints on things. It's more so just what they believe in is the opposite of what the right's doing.
That's right. That's the classic definition of a reactionary.
Exactly.
They don't actually have a philosophical foundation. They're just reacting to what the other side is doing. Now, obviously, there's elements in the right that do that as well, but libertarians, are a very principled intellectual movement all around the world.
And that's, I mean, I think we've probably talked about this a million times, but that's what's so attractive about libertarianism is the consistency, and which no other side has. And I mean, case in point, them flip-flopping on gay marriage over the last 20 years, but you can, there's a list as long as you want of things that the left and the right aren't consistent on, which libertarians are always consistent on, based on the fact that the philosophy is principled. Yes. We've gone a whole big circle, which is great, because I'm super happy to hear your thoughts on all of those things, and I think a lot of that touches on the points as well that you've made in that maiden speech. But one other question that I just had out of curiosity about the maiden speech was, given how superficially controversial it was. Obviously, I wouldn't find it to be controversial. I agree with everything you said, but as far as the media and the public sphere is concerned, a lot of the things you said were very controversial. What was the aftermath of that speech getting widespread attention, both from like the public and from other parliamentarians? I'm curious to know.
Well, what happened was, so it gets banned. Now, by that stage, only about 120 people had seen the video on John Humphrey's YouTube channel. But then as soon as we found out it was banned, me and Rob Cribb and Nathan Thomason sat in my office for about 8 hours with a case of beer. And we just pumped it out to everybody we knew. And we said, hey, look, this speech has been bad. So everyone wanted to look at it. Now, then I like to think that the sheer magnificence of the content then helped push it along so that it's been now seen over 1 million times. That's what we like to think, at least. But look, it featured in Gateway Pundit and the other one, which is Zero Hedge, which are big sites in America, and InfoWars with Alex Jones. Now, look, I was pleased. I know he's got a big audience. I'm not. Look, I would listen to Alex Jones maybe once or twice a year for about 15 minutes, and I usually sort of turn him off when I think, look, he's gone too far there. Anyway, we were pleased that he gave it prominence on his website. Now, then in Australia, the mainstream media, the only one in the mainstream media who's touched it was, and I was very grateful, Corey Bernardi on Sky News gave it a lot of praise, which we were very happy about. But the rest of the mainstream media has completely ignored it. Now, if it had been a new Greens MLC or a new Labor MLC, and for whatever reason their speech was banned, their maiden speech was banned, well, I think that would have been front page news. Now, the thing is with my speech, I like to think that if they could have attacked my speech, I think that they would have. But I think that we've made a lot of claims, but I think we've said it in a irrefutable way. So I think that they've just made that decision. Let's not touch it. Let's not let more people know that they could watch this speech, because I think that the biggest thing for the left these days is global warming, and lots of other politicians have come out and sort of been skeptical of one part of global warming or another part of global warming. They say, oh, well, we need nuclear to reduce emissions, or we need to support the coal industry. Well, all those things are true, but I think leadership demands at this point in time that we actually come out and say, look, are we absolutely certain that the science is settled? That's what needs to be said, and I was very proud to say, because I think that we do need to revisit that debate. Is the science settled?
I thought the reaction in the room at the end of your speech was pretty incredible. Can you give us a breakdown of who was in that room? Was it other parliamentarians from other parties? Was it just supporters?
Well, so in the parliamentary chamber, the parliamentary colleagues will attend, and they almost all of them did, which I was very happy about. Now, look, I think when you're going to give sort of a bit of a hard-hitting speech, it's important to try and throw in a bit of humour in there, which we tried to do on a few occasions, which sort of lightens things up. I think the greatest speech giver of the 20th century was President Kennedy. And if you watch any of President Kennedy's speech, he does in the first couple of minutes really make the audience laugh 2 or 3 times. He's very, very good at it. So that's so even though probably all my parliamentary colleagues were probably horrified by aspects of it, some of them were probably horrified by every single aspect of it. But putting a bit of humour in there sort of lightens the mood. But then the gallery was, look, anybody can go into the gallery, but I had invited, 150 of my mates and a lot of Liberal Democrats and everybody else to come along and to watch it. So, and it was good to see the gallery was full.
Yeah, I was going to say, just because the reaction was so immense, I was wondering if it was only parliamentarians. I was going to say, why, if they're applauding you so much, why aren't they joining us?
Well, the convention is, I think that the other colleagues will up and come around and everybody shakes your hand after the maiden speech. So we could say it was conventional. We could just say that they were so impressed with the content.
Planted a few seeds, maybe.
Well, hopefully, yes.
Just to your point before, where you were saying that had it been a Greens MP or a Labor MP whose speech had been banned, they wouldn't have cast it so widely. I think absolutely right is the idea that they don't want your they don't want to legitimize your views by answering them, and there's nothing that they can specifically dismantle within the stuff that you've said. Like, you were very careful to give essentially what are irrefutable claims if you do the research as well. But there's parts of the speech, and for example, my favorite part of the speech, which is the tangent at the end about anarcho-capitalism and how that would be immensely beneficial and all the rest of that. That's stuff that is not widely discussed at all. Like, attacking climate change is almost closer to the allowable opinion than anarcho-capitalism is, just because anarcho-capitalism is a bit more obscure and so much easier to caricature. I think that there's certainly an element of not wanting to widen the broadcast of your speech, especially for that as well, to not give people even access to those ideas, because keeping that in the dark is a very useful tool for the government and for the state in general.
Yes, well, anarcho-capitalism is, for people who've never heard of the concept before, shocking, whether they're left-wingers or right-wingers. And most people have not ever considered that as an option. They sort of think the government is up there. The government is sort of like our king or our God. And there might be a bit of argument about how big it is, but there will always be this king God figure, the government. So yes, I did want to very much use the speech to outline for people who haven't heard the concept before what the anarcho-capitalists are suggesting. And I think we did it in a reasonable way. We said, look, this is not something where we'd want to sort of overthrow society. We'd want to bring it in through democratic consent, and it would be something that would probably take decades to achieve. And I said, look, it could well be the case we get the government down to 5 to 10% of the GDP, and then the democratic consent is, look, we do need some government services, might be around the military, the police, whatever. Okay, so but I said, well, look, the goal should be a zero GDP government, turning the Legislative Council into a privately owned museum. And say, look, if that's the goal, it'll help us get us there further. So yes, the lefties love their government, love the big state, love to push people around. So yes, they would be horrified by that concept, because it sort of puts them out of business, puts their sort of messiah complex out of business.
Yeah, and not only that, like, yes, if you just tell someone anarcho-capitalism in a sentence, it's very easy to discredit, because it's like, well, you're insane, like that would never work. But you kind of need a minimum of the 10 minutes that you took to at least explain it, to have the foundation to understand it. But what was I going to say? I had something insightful to say about anarcho-capitalism.
Look, I think there's a good chance that an anarcho-capitalist state would be a very humane society. And people think that libertarians are in favor of it, or some libertarians, not all, some libertarians are in favor of it, because they think that our agenda is to make the rich richer, so we can sort of be a society dominated by Ayn Rand superheroes. Okay, and that's a good thing. Okay, if we have people on merit become, influential in society. But the other aspect of it is, which is, I truly believe, the social ills that we have will actually be better cured by an anarcho-capitalist state. People will come together, pool resources. People will be richer. The vast majority of people will have more disposable income in their pocket. And do people who live in, $3 million homes, do they want to see a big underclass out there? Well, I think they don't, because it's, they've got, human compassion inside them, but it's also in their self-interest. They don't want, like half of society to be living in rags, because they'll rise up at some point, won't they? So I think that we would have a society where rich people would come together, employ talented people, and they would sort of, have summits and they say, look, how can we seriously for all time fix this poverty problem? And, we're probably always going to have people living in poverty, but it's a question of how do we minimize it? And I think that anarcho-capitalism, it's, people who they would think that libertarians don't care about solving the poverty crisis. I think not only do we care about it, I think we're the only ones that can properly solve it.
Yeah, it's a more optimistic view of humanity to think that we would solve it without the need for government and coercion than the idea that, you know, without government and coercion, we would let people starve and die. We are the more optimistic ones who have the more optimistic view of human nature. I remembered the
Yes.
thing I was going to say, which was that it's really it's a really pertinent point to make that people don't really consider, because apart from the fact that anarcho-capitalism, we believe, would work better in terms of solving a lot of the problems, but the issue of morality, which I don't think anyone who I think is really important to make, which you made in your speech, is this idea that the government is, when you ask people what you think the government, where do you think government derives its power from? Generally, the answer people will give you is, you know, the will of the people, or democracy, or the fact that, you know, we give them the power. You know, we as a country have decided to give them the power, but that's not true. Government derives its power in a very real sense on a daily basis from violence, from the fact that they have all of the guns, or more guns than anyone else, and they can, through the use of violence, monopolize the use of violence within a certain territory. And this is irrefutable when you stop and think about it. And you made the case of the parking fine. But this is, I think, a really important foundational point to give to just anyone if they're considering anarcho-capitalism is, yeah, you're right. Like the system that we hold up to be this deity and this god or whatever, this king, actually rules us through the threat of the use of force, and they hide it and they obfuscate it through fancy elections and nice slogans and very personable people to give you the messages, the politicians on the front lines. But they're actually, when you get down to it, there is nothing they will not use force to enforce within their own laws.
We are a society underpinned by the threat of violence. That is the foundation of the anarcho-capitalist world outlook. And we believe that we can have a more humane and a more successful and a more harmonious society if we have a society where we will have contracts and agreements, okay, but we won't have this big government enforcing its laws through the threat of violence. Now there will be, this is such a utopia. We have to admit it is a utopia. And so it's something that we want to bring in over time, but steadily bring in. I think we can cut the government. We've got to get the majority of people to support us. Okay, so that's challenge number one. And then when even if we had 75% majorities in all the state and federal parliaments around this country, well, we would, you know, if we just cut off the age pension like that overnight, well, we're going to have social chaos. And so nobody is suggesting that at all. We want anarcho-capitalism because we're going to have a better society. We probably wouldn't want to shut down public hospitals overnight. Now, we probably would want to look to privatizing the healthcare system pretty quickly. Okay, but we would want to sort of phase things in over, you know, 3-4 decades. That would be my guess. And now there still would be guns in society. There would be privately owned guns, and there'd be private security forces. But look, because it is so sort of far off at this stage, I think we see it as the ideal, this utopia. We work towards it. We keep winning public support for it over time. And look, I think it's a magnificent mission to be a part of.
And I think this is a really important point as well, because if anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism broadly, let's conflate the two terms for a moment, is described as being utopian, usually a utopia, like when you think of the communist utopia or the socialist utopia or whatever, the utopia can't work until it's reached its end state. Like, you need to get to that end state of the utopia before it functions. And to get to that end state, you need to slaughter millions and, you know, kill off all dissenting opinions and all the rest of it. And that's what makes the utopia utopian, is the fact that it cannot be reached really ever. And to get there, you know, you have to cross a sea of blood. the difference, the really important, significant difference between libertarianism and these other utopias is that even if you don't reach the utopia, every step along the way that you get closer to it, the lives of the individual are improved. At every point where you remove government interference, where you increase individual liberty, where you strengthen property rights, the person, the individual person, finds their lot in life improved and their liberty more expanded, which is a really important distinction between the idea of utopia in the socialist sense and utopia in the libertarian sense.
That's brilliant, Pietro. I love it. I'm very impressed. I wish I had had this conversation before the Maiden speech, because I would have put that in there. I would have said, look, it is a utopia. The good news is the journey to the utopia is going to be nothing but positive anyway. So let's get moving on it.
Well, it's funny. I got that idea from watching the speech. So in a way, it was circular. And maybe you intended it subconsciously or something.
Right.
So let's jump to something else, because I did have lots I wanted to talk about specifically, and I'm conscious we don't have all that much time. But one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is something that, because it's all well and good to talk about, how good the speech was, how it's gaining a lot of traction, and all the hopes and dreams we have for libertarianism. But the truth is that we have to be very real with ourselves as libertarians, and that is that we are constantly losing this war against the state. And there is recently one particularly big thing looming on the horizon, which we need to all be aware of. And that is they're looking to, and you can expand on this, because I'm sure you know lots more than I do, but they're looking to expand the powers of the ACMA, which is the Australian Communications Media Authority. Now, that may sound innocuous, expanding some powers somewhere, but this is especially important for libertarians. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that, what's happening, and why libertarians should be alarmed about this?
Well, look, it's absolutely appalling. There's a lot of good commentary out there on why it is so appalling. What they're trying to do is the government authority is seeking legislative power to be able to force social media companies to take posts down that contain either misinformation or disinformation. Now, Joe Biden tried to do the same thing in the United States recently, and it got struck down. So the lefties are trying to do this all around the world. That very disappointing conservative government in Britain is doing exactly the same thing as we speak, and now the federal government under Albanese is doing it. And guess where it all started? It started under Scott Morrison. Okay. Now, I believe what the origin of this is, when these governments saw how much they can treat the people like farm animals, and that most people go along with it, they thought, gee, let's step things up here. We can have greater control if we just shut down those pesky heretics. Okay, so they are trying to do this. Now, I'm in the process of working on a submission. ACMA's invited public submissions, I think, till the middle of August. And I'm going to, now look, at most of these submissions are very legalistic, boring documents. I'm going to be sort of spending a bit of time talking about saying, it's always the baddies in history that want to censor free speech. And I go into a bit of detail with the primary documents talking about Socrates, who got killed because he's exercising free speech, and then Martin Luther, and Galileo, and then Bertrand Russell, who was a English statesman and during World War I, and he went to jail because he was campaigning on the British getting out of the war, which in retrospect was the right position, but he went to jail for it. And then the fifth example I'm going to talk about is Robert Menzies, who I generally have a favourable view of. He wasn't so much a libertarian, but I mean, as far as national leaders go on the right, Robert Menzies is very, very good. But he tried to ban the Communist Party in this country, and that was a battle that went on for at least a year, if not two. And I'm going to say, he put it up as a referendum. And the Australian people said, no, Mr. Prime Minister, we do not want to give you the power to ban the Communist Party. Now, this is at a time when the communists have not just got the Soviet Union, they've just, in very recent memory, brutalised Eastern Europe. They've just taken over China in 1949. They've got communist insurgencies throughout Southeast Asia. There genuinely was a communist element in this country trying to overthrow society and become like Moscow. But the Australian people had the good sense to say, look, these commoners might be bastards, but we're not going to ban their free speech. And the Australian people made the right decision. So I just wanted to go through some of these examples in history, and we're going to put my submission out on social media, hopefully, in about a week. And I just hope that people can sort of, see that this is a big problem. And it's look, the good news, one little bit of good news on this debate is that the coalition, even though they proposed it in government, in opposition, they promoted it in government, and now in opposition they've announced they're going to oppose it. Well, that's good, but I'll tell you what, the Liberals sound good in opposition and they sound crap in government. So this is why everybody should leave the Liberal Party and join the Libertarian Party.
One of the problems with government is that, like, it doesn't matter which side it is, they want this like monopoly on free speech or free thought even, and like, censoring mis or disinformation sounds great if it's only one way, but the fact is that it's going to come back and bite you. It doesn't matter which side you support, it's going to come back and bite you when you want your views to be public and then they're censored.
They don't want to ban somebody saying the earth is flat because, it doesn't matter if people believe that because it's inconsequential, because they don't know it's never going to be a significant amount of people that say it. So I think there are websites out there saying the earth's flat. The government couldn't care less about that. They only want to ban speech that embarrasses the government. That's the only thing. This is what this ACMA thing's about. It's about global warming and transgender surgeries. That's what it's about, because they can't win the debate on those two issues.
Well, like your Maiden speech being banned off YouTube, it's because, or not getting any mainstream media traction, it's because a lot of the claims you said are irrefutable and they don't want to embarrass themselves. It's the same with this, with this proposed bill. It's that, let's not have these conversations even raised, because when they're raised, they're going to be found out.
That's right. It's like this example of Socrates. I hope you gentlemen can read the report, the submission I'll put in shortly. And it's about, Socrates had so angered the establishment in Athens because he ridiculed them, because he made them look stupid, okay? And this is what they hated. I remember when Gladys Berejiklian, when we had this first illegal big freedom march in Sydney in July 2021, and she was just ropeable. She was just furious that 50 people had come out in the street. She wasn't worried about COVID being transmitted. She was upset that 50,000 people had defied her edict to stay home. That's why she was so angry.
It's curious that I'd never heard, maybe I'm just uneducated, I'd never heard the words misinformation and disinformation being so widespreadly used until the COVID stuff. Like that's when suddenly misinformation was everywhere and disinformation was everywhere. It's very curious that in many ways it was misinformation and disinformation, which in the end kind of were the straws that broke the camel's back with the whole narrative around COVID, because it was this disinformation which allowed mass non-compliance, which eventually caused the relenting, because, everyone could see that, this thing wasn't about to kill and slaughter all of mankind, and we were all going to be okay by living our lives. It's very curious that in the aftermath of what I would consider is, an enormous government embarrassment, the handling of COVID, and an apparent one if you have followed the misinformation. It's right after this that it's disinformation and misinformation, which need to be curtailed immediately.
Well, there was a very good article in the Weekend Australian, with Chris Kenny, who was reporting on a freedom of information request that Senator Antic from the Liberal Party, one of the very few good Liberals left, and he is terrific, Senator Antic. He did this freedom of information. He's found out there was 4,000 posts during, social media posts during the COVID hysteria that the government forced the social media companies to take down. Now, it's turned out that a hell of a lot of those posts are truth, and the government was lying to us. And these bastards don't have any introspection and think, oh, gee, maybe we shouldn't have taken down those posts. So no, it's not about, these people aren't interested in truth. Freedom of speech is always about preventing embarrassment to insecure, dumb leaders.
That's a great line. You should put that in your report as well. So I suppose the immediate thing that springs to mind is, okay, this does sound serious, and I mean, anyone who's even followed like the way the Twitter file, like the way Elon Musk exposed how the FBI was doing this sort of thing, not legally, but through sort of secret means to dispose of misinformation and disinformation with Twitter prior to Elon Musk's taking over. So it's all very serious, it's all very worrying. Is there anything that people who are alarmed by this can do to push back ourselves, or is there a movement to jump on with, or is there something we can do? What can we do?
Well, look, it's a good question. Obviously, people can join the Libertarian Party. They should get in contact with every federal, state, and federal member they can. Whether they're Labor or Liberal. And look, I'll tell you who I think is going to be very important in this debate, and that is the Greens. Now, the Greens have got a big chunk of votes there in Canberra, in the Senate. The coalition is saying that they are going to vote against it. Good. I'm sure that the One Nation people will. Good. Who else is there in the Senate? Oh, you've got Senator Babbitt. He's terrific on this issue. So not many. So then I think that it could easily come down to the Greens. Now, the Greens, up until recently, were pretty radically pro-free speech. The right really was dominant in the 80s and the 90s, really up until the Supreme Court, really up until Obama. When the right was dominant, it's the dominant side of politics that wants to censor things. Okay, and so when the right was dominant, they would try and ban smut, and lewd references in movies and things. And there used to be a show called Hey Hey It's Saturday. Once every few months, someone would say a dirty joke or use rude language, and then right-wingers would ring up the switchboard and just complain, and the host would have to come out and protest. Now, it was the left then were the champions of free speech, but now it's swung around the other way. The left is dominant around the Western world, and whoever's dominant wants to ban things. And now what do they want to ban? Well, they want to ban, having a rational debate about global warming. They want to have a rational debate about whether we are transitioning teenage kids too frequently and too early. And they want to, then, of course, what we saw with COVID. So they want to debate, the Libertarians, once again, are principled. We're always going to be on the side, even if we don't like the speech, we never would have supported banning the Communist Party or banning communist books. Okay, no. I mean, I think, the West has been proudly pro-free speech, for a long time. And, West Germany after World War II was a liberal democracy. But West Germany, given their particular history, did say, look, we're a liberal democracy, free speech, no censorship, but we're just going to make this little exception where we're going to ban Mein Kampf. And everybody around the world said, oh, well, look, given the history, that's probably fair enough. Okay. But I think they made a mistake because, it's that book still gets circulated underground in West Germany. Okay, well, now, and I think when you start making exceptions, even under extraordinary circumstances like Mein Kampf in West Germany in the 1950s, I think free speech is tough. Okay, and there's always going to be tough examples saying, well, what about this? Look, the rule should be, let's maximize free speech, because one of the best things about free speech is that very occasionally, sometimes not that occasionally, a fringe idea, an unpalatable idea, will turn out to be a very good idea. So, Galileo is the classic example. But, ivermectin could easily be another example. Okay, but it's often the good ideas. Look, if you're going to go around banning ideas, sometimes you're probably going to ban ideas which would have a net negative on society. That's a fact. But you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and there's, of course, the notion that banning something, like banning anything, doesn't work. It doesn't stop everyone from being able to access that thing. In fact, in many of those cases, like, for example, Mein Kampf, or anytime a book has been banned in recent memory, it actually elevates the status of that book. It makes people more interested in... Look at your speech, for example. Like, your speech is the perfect example. Like, it elevates the importance of something by banning it. So, free speech will find a way to exist anyway, even if it has to be through a black market of free speech. But then what you're doing is you're punishing, again, under the threat of violence and death, people who are exercising that free speech. And like, you don't have to take that thought experiment very far at all to realize that whoever you are, aren't going to be the dominant power in government forever. In fact, the Liberal and Labor generally flip every 10 years or so. The free speech that you ban one day is the free speech that is your own the next, which is banned and sees you thrown in prison. And I suppose that's a fairly central libertarian insight into that whole conversation there as well, which maybe some of the other right-wing parties wouldn't necessarily make.
Yeah, look, this is why I've been a bit uncomfortable with this, this Yumi Stein's book, and it is a disgusting book, and it's not about sex education. It's absolutely appalling. But then the tough political question is do we get the state to ban it? Okay, now a lot of people who I normally feel very comfortable with, we'll just broadly call the Christian right. I like the Christian right. Okay, I think they are good people, and they're intelligent people, and we've got a lot of overlap with them. Okay, but on this in this instance, we're parting company, and I'm saying, look, I'm in favour of your private boycotts. Okay, but let's leave the government out of this one. And the point is that if we get in the habit of banning things, the way the left is going, if on the current trajectory, they'll start banning the Bible in about 20 years' time. Okay, because I mean, it's an ancient book, and like all, parts of it go back, 4,000 years. And so there are some odd things in the Bible. I find them fascinating. It's a real window into what was happening, in the Mediterranean world, 4,000 years ago. But there's a bit of, stuff that we would think's crazy. Okay, well, if the left keeps going, they're going to say in 20 years' time, look, this is an unacceptable book. It's promoting violence. It's doing this. It's doing that. We're going to ban it. So this is why, the Christian right on this occasion, who I very much consider allies and friends, they are wrong on wanting to ban this disgusting book. I think look, their protests have resulted in the book probably selling 10 times more than it would have. Okay, yeah. But I think that's a lot. I think that's a lot of adults not buying it for their kids. It's a lot of adults buying it in sympathy. I think that's what's happening there. I don't think it's going to be very, very, very few parents that are going to want their kids to read this book. But the protests have resulted in its sales going up a hell of a lot, no doubt about that.
Yeah, so the book for our viewers or listeners who aren't aware is what Yumi Styles, did you say, is the author, and it's a book that talks about sex and fairly sexually explicit content aimed at a really young audience, and so that's the thing that's caused a reaction from the conservative right. And I think, look, you can understand it from the conservative right's worldview, because the conservative right is a group that has understood many of the core tenets of libertarianism without understanding the most core one yet, which is that government shouldn't enforce anything on anyone. Like they appreciate a lot of the other aspects of individual liberty and individual freedom and all of that, but they still cling to the idea that government should be used to promote what is good. And what is good is, of course, very lots of people disagree very vehemently. It's very objective. Yes, good. So we don't have all that long left, but there were a couple of other questions which I was hoping to ask you. And I know Max might have another question or two as well. So just out of I suppose one of the things you talk a fair bit about the Liberal Party, and without going into like everything that's wrong with the Liberal Party, because I mean we talk about the liberal things that are wrong with the Liberal Party here as well, quite often. But so recently we spoke with a Liberal Party MP who is very agreeable on lots of the things that we would agree with: anti-mandates, anti the COVID lockdown stuff, anti LGBTQ agenda, pushing it through the use of government and taxpayer funded stuff and that. What do you think is the major thing that differentiates a good Liberal Party person, such as Alex Antic or whoever, with a libertarian? What's the step they need to make? Because I think they're the people who are the most amenable to our message, and we need to get them to make that jump. So what is the main difference, do you think?
I think if let's say hypothetically we had got 10% of the vote at the last federal election across the country, which would have put us on par with the Greens. I think if we'd got to that, I think half of the Liberal Party membership is really sympathetic to the Libertarian Party and really wants us to succeed. And they really are disappointed with their own party. I'm absolutely convinced more than half of the Liberal Party membership across Australia agrees with what I just said. But they make this calculation, which, understandable. They say, but look, Labor's the big threat, and the best bet we've got to sort of defeat Labor is the Liberal Party. I think what we just need to redouble our efforts, roll up our sleeves, punch as hard as we can. There's other minor parties on the right which we're friendly with, but I believe that they're not going to be around forever. And I think we've got to first consolidate the minor rights. I know that some people suggest that we should merge with them, but if we merge with them, we're just going to be a little version of the Liberal Party. We're going to have lost our... And so we just need to basically consolidate the minor right. Then once we get to 10%, then I think you're going to start to see some of the Liberal Party, people will want to be part of us. Now, the problem with that is, when you start to become a successful party, you become a magnet for opportunists and careerists. Okay, the good thing about the Libertarian Party at the moment is now, if some people are out there and they just got this lust to be in Parliament, well, they don't come to us, do they? Yeah, well, they won't join us. But then the problem with becoming a 10 to 15% party is then you will start to attract people who lust to be in Parliament. Those people who lust to be in Parliament are the last people you want in Parliament. And that's what the Labor Party and the Liberal Party are full of. So it's a very high priority. I believe we will get to being a 10 to 12% party. And it may be best if we just cap out there just by maintaining our purity. The Greens have tapped out at sort of 10%, but they've been the most influential political party in Australia this century. They've dragged the Labor Party to the left, and in the process, they've joined the Liberal Party to the left. Well, look, we want to replicate what they've done, but on the right.
Yeah, so kind of the size of what ACT in New Zealand is. That's which seems like they have a fairly good chance right now of joining, coalitioning to make Parliament, to make government. The problem, I guess, you're saying is that a lot of Liberal Party members won't jump to us until there is more legitimacy to us, like until they can see that we are possibly a force to actually be reckoned with, and that might be able to actually be a solution. And for the moment, they're hedging their bets and just going with the lesser of two evils with the Liberal Party.
That's what I believe is happening. Yes. Now there's a lot of people in the Liberal Party who who understand our libertarian approach and don't like it. Well, that's okay. That's fine, because we know, that's what the Liberal Party can be for. But I know that there's a lot of people there who vote for us.
Well, I mean, yeah, I hope that's correct, because that would be a very optimistic way of looking not only at what we can achieve in the future, but as kind of the cross section of society and who agrees with our ideas, because it feels wrong to be such a small minority right now, especially considering what we've all just been through with COVID and what seems to be around the corner in many of the things that we're doing at the moment. We are probably out of time there. Was there any last message that you wanted to share with our audience, or any last thoughts, Max or John?
Let you go, John.
You go first, Max.
I've got nothing to add.
Okay.
I thought it was quite insightful today. So thank you for coming on.
Well, look, I would just like to encourage you gentlemen, you young gents, to keep going with collectivitis, okay? Because, I've given quite a few sort of interviews recently, and in many cases it's sort of similar questions. But with you guys, I really do feel like we talk about things with more substance and in more depth. So I very much hope you can persist with it, because we do need a channel in this country for sort of, an intellectual libertarian look at things. So I would just encourage your show to, keep doing what you're doing. You don't want to just talk about things that people can go and get the same content, from 50 other sources. Okay, you want it to be unique. You need to sort of say, look, we're going to sort of have a deep dive into this sort of, subject that you've got to have a higher IQ than most people to follow. That's a good thing. I think that's a good market to be in, gents.
That's a very flattering review. Thank you. And I mean, I guess that's kind of the point of it, is we want to talk about these are questions that I genuinely have, and once we get someone who might be able to answer them, it seems ridiculous to us to not ask the questions that are a little bit deeper. So thanks for those kind words, and thanks again for your time. You very generously donated to come and speak with us again. I am certain we would love to have you again on in the future at some points, hopefully reoccurring. So if you're amenable to that, we are certainly as well.
Absolutely. Let's do it again before Christmas.
Perfect. That sounds great. In the meantime, you've got lots of work to do saving the world. So we'll let you get on with that. Thank you so much for coming on. For those of us who don't already, please like us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you very much. We'll catch you later.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye. Thank you.